So the purpose of this meeting today is to increase your awareness and understanding of the work that's been done over the last 6 months, with a special focus on hazard mitigation or the county's priorities for addressing the hazards we discussed during last month's public meeting for those that joined us. We also want to hear from you to ensure that we're accounting for what matters most to you all, the ones that live and work in McHenry County. Quick note that the county's mitigation committee that David and Bob both mentioned earlier, which is comprised of representatives from the county and all municipalities and townships, have been meeting monthly since November to advance this important work. So just want to see a quick thank you to those members that are joining us today for their commitment and hard work. So to achieve our desired outcomes for today, we're going to do a few things. We're going to quickly review FEMA's prescribed hazard mitigation planning process and requirements, the county's progress to date, as well as recap the findings from our 2023 risk assessment and public survey. Then we'll present how we used those results to revalidate the county's mitigation goals and guidelines and discuss how we revised the county's action plan. Speaking of mitigation, the state just released the notice of intent deadline for a few FEMA administered mitigation grant programs. So we want to provide you with some information about those programs today to get you thinking about the kinds of projects you may want to pursue federal funding for, either as a county or as an individual jurisdiction. And then finally, we want to hear from you. We've dedicated a little over 20 minutes at the end of the meeting to address any of your questions and comments. Next slide, please. All right. So before we jump in to FEMA's requirements for this work, I quickly want to cover a few definitions for clarity. You'll be hearing these terms throughout the afternoon, so want to make sure we're all on the same page. So first, natural hazards. So these are environmental phenomena that have the potential to impact societies and the human environment. So these shouldn't be confused with other types of hazards, such as man-made hazards. For example, a flood resulting from changes in river flows is a natural hazard, whereas flooding due to a dam failure is considered a man-made hazard. Next, we've got mitigation. So mitigation is the effort taken to reduce the loss of life and property by lessening the impact of disaster events. So like elevating a home above base flood elevation to lessen the impact of future flooding events would be an example of a mitigation activity. Finally, resilience. So resilience is the capacity of individuals, communities, businesses, institutions, governments to adapt to changing conditions and prepare for, withstand, and rapidly recover from disruptions caused by disaster events. So really, your ability to recover quickly, to bounce back from disasters. All right. So at this point, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Kelly Reddick, who's going to provide us with an overview of FEMA's hazard mitigation processes. So Kelly, take it away.
Thank you. And I will try to keep this short because I know a lot of folks on the phone have kind of been with us through the whole planning process. So this is a little bit of what you've heard before, but for the new people who are joining us today, just a quick overview of really what hazard mitigation planning is and kind of where the county is at with their process. And we'll do a little bit of refresh on the last monthly meeting we had, or the last public meeting we had, where we reviewed some of the results of the county's natural hazard risk assessment. So hazard mitigation really refers to any action that eliminates or reduces risk to life and property from natural disasters, as Justin was just saying. This really breaks that cycle of disaster damage and repair by preventing damage to homes, businesses, community facilities, and even infrastructure. And hazard mitigation isn't just projects. It can also include policy updates, initiatives, educational initiatives, things like that. So FEMA requires state and local governments to have hazard mitigation plans in order to be eligible for grant assistance. These plans have to be updated every 5 years to maintain that eligibility. And really, the purpose of the mitigation plan, beyond sort of the checking that box for the federal funding requirement, is to develop a long-term strategy that reduces damage, reduces community disruption, and addresses repetitive loss impacts. So a good way to think about mitigation is that it's really an investment. I know a lot of folks here have probably heard Dave say this a lot. So, studies show that on average, every dollar spent on mitigation saves $6 in future disaster losses. This really demonstrates that hazard mitigation activities, which include, again, construction projects and studies, initiatives, um, reduce future costs associated with disaster response and recovery. So for McHenry County's hazard mitigation plan update, again, speaking to what Dave and Justin have said before, we really focused on regional collaboration and relationship building between the county, townships, and other municipalities. So here are some examples of different types of hazard mitigation projects. These activities are known to reduce risk and are also eligible for grant funding from FEMA. So they include things like, flood protection and home retrofits. These are really common hazard mitigation activities. Stormwater control and stream restoration are also good projects. There's a really big focus on nature-based solutions from the federal government right now, that contribute to or help prevent stormwater and riverine flooding. And then you can also see that emergency power projects are good examples of mitigation projects. This can include generators. It can even include community microgrids. We're seeing FEMA fund more projects like that recently. And then things like, storm shelters and safe rooms, and other activities that kind of support those really, quickly occurring hazards, such as, tornadoes, summer storms that whip up really quickly, things like that. So FEMA has a prescribed hazard mitigation planning process that is actually codified into law. So when we've been supporting the county through their plan update, we really make sure that we are following FEMA's defined process here, which generally includes 4 different steps. So there's, organizing the planning process and resources, which includes creating the planning team and the mitigation committee that's been meeting monthly. The second step is to assess risks and capabilities, which we have already done. And then the third step, which is really going to be the focus of today's meeting, is developing a mitigation strategy. So the strategy is where the county sort of reevaluates its existing goals, objectives, and actions from the previous hazard mitigation plan, and sees if there are any revisions or adjustments that need to be made based on the threats identified in the risk assessment, and how risks have evolved since the last plan update. So the mitigation strategy also contains an action plan with really clear identified next steps, a schedule of activities, responsible communities. And as Justin noted earlier, again, we are really hoping to get feedback from the community today on the county's mitigation strategy that has been updated. So then, lastly, the fourth step, the plan will be sent to the Illinois Emergency Management Agency, or IEMA, for an initial review to make sure that the plan meets all FEMA requirements. And then the plan will go to FEMA for review. And then once FEMA has approved, the county will formally adopt the plan, and you'll meet that requirement for having a mitigation plan in order to pursue future FEMA funding. All right. So this is just kind of again, a refresher on that process. So the hazard mitigation planning process is somewhat of a partnership between McHenry County, IEMA, and FEMA. So following this sort of chart here, so McHenry County works with its stakeholders and neighboring jurisdictions to create the hazard mitigation plan. The county, once the plan is complete, which will be very soon, the county will submit that plan to IEMA, who will conduct an interim review and approval. Then IEMA will pitch the plan up to FEMA for a final review and approval. And then the county and participating jurisdictions will again have to adopt that plan in order for you to continue to be eligible for future FEMA funding. All right, so just another refresh on kind of our project timeline. We are inching towards. Oh,
Oh, I love it.
we
I
got a
love
live
it.
mic. I'm gonna mute you. Sorry, Adam. um, so for the overall timeline, we are inching towards towards submitting that plan to IEMA here in the next few weeks. Today, we're here at our second public meeting to again obtain feedback on the county's mitigation strategy. And our goal is to submit this plan really in the next few weeks to provide sufficient time for FEMA and IEMA's review processes. And our goal in submitting this plan early is to ideally have approval for the plan by September or so, so that way the county and its jurisdictions can go through your plan adoption process by November, which is really when a lot of the FEMA grants will be due later here at the end of the year, which we'll talk about later. All right. So again, just to give folks who are new to the planning process, maybe haven't been to a meeting yet before, this is just kind of a bit of a refresher on our last public meeting where we presented the results of the county's risk assessment. And this effort, updating the risk assessment really started with a great deal of research, which included both plan review and hazard research. So, from the hazard side, as most of us here know, presidential disaster declarations are rare for McHenry County and Illinois in general. But this doesn't mean that you don't have impacts. So just as, kind of case studies for all of the natural hazards that McHenry County and its communities can experience within a year. Over the last 5, there has been a significant flood event from the Fox River. There's been 7 hail incidents, some of which were rather large hail. There has been damage from lightning strikes to property. There has been quite a number of severe storms and wind events that cause trees to fall. Debris can cause damage to homes and infrastructure. Power lines are usually affected. Um, and on top of that, there's been a 2-year drought that impacted most of northern Illinois. So definitely, lots of natural hazard risk here, even though, some of FEMA's data might indicate otherwise. So, in addition to the hazard research, we also reviewed FEMA's National Risk Index, which, for folks who are not familiar with the National Risk Index, FEMA actually produces this data to support local mitigation planning processes using just information collected from their own systems, like public assistance, individual assistance, SBA loans, things like that. So using damage data and records from their systems, FEMA actually provides a comparison of different communities' risks to identify the most hazard-prone areas in the nation. And as you can see here, FEMA has actually identified McHenry County as having relatively moderate risk with moderate annual losses associated with natural hazards. And these losses and the risk, according to FEMA's data, is really driven by tornadoes and extreme cold weather. But we really wanted to supplement FEMA's data with, again, that local experience and knowledge of your own community's challenges. So we worked with representatives from participating jurisdictions to reevaluate risk scores from the previous plan update for 8 natural hazards that are included in the plan. So based on the outcomes of that coordination, all of the risk scores from the last plan update increased. As you can see here in this table, kind of the comparison from the old scores to the new scores. Now, some of this change is due to an update in the risk score methodology that we implemented. However, there are still some slight differences in the top hazards that threaten the county that are substantiated by really historical losses. So, for example, severe summer storms, which include hail, high winds, and lightning, is now the top hazard. So, moving up from that 4th spot to the 1st spot. And really, one of the primary reasons this is now a serious concern in the community is because there are really few mitigation measures in place that can prevent impacts from hail and strong winds. especially in older neighborhoods where, building codes were maybe not as strong as they are today at the time that a lot of these homes were constructed. And additionally, the consequences of summer storms has also been assumed to increase due to more large outdoor events being planned within the county. Flooding is still in second place for the top threats to the county, and the risk there increased again due to the 2017 Fox River flood that caused a lot of widespread damages to homes and infrastructure. And you can see that severe winter storms are still sitting there in the top three natural hazard risks and threats to the county. And this is mostly due to impacts that have occurred to utilities and roadways. So, as part of the plan update, we also asked for some early input from the mitigation planning team for ideas on actual mitigation actions, which again can include projects and it can include policies and initiatives. So, here's some ideas the planning team and participating jurisdictions put forth for specific hazards to include in the mitigation strategy. So, from a flooding perspective, noting projects such as stream restoration, flood study updates, continuing with floodplain buyouts, and maybe even looking at structure elevations. And again, focusing on green infrastructure, which again has quite a forefront place in the federal funding priorities right now. For tornadoes, projects like safe rooms and updating emergency alert systems were identified. For extreme heat, we talked about potential solutions such as, designated cooling shelters, even investing in sustainable backup power resources, such as solar farms, microgrids. For summer storms, we have utility grid modernization and retrofits, which would require partnering, as well as potential roadway elevations, more drainage projects. For winter storms, we have increasing shelter accessibility for disadvantaged and underserved residents in particular, as well as educational campaigns for vegetative management and having more tabletop exercises surrounding potential scenarios that could occur during a winter storm. And last but not least, there are some ideas for drought mitigation as well, such as using natural landscaping, having consistent restrictions for water conservation across the county, and exploring new water reservoirs or water allocations from Lake Michigan. So we also got some feedback from the public survey that was deployed earlier this year on potential mitigation actions that were considered in the updated mitigation strategy. So the most popular ideas for mitigation projects that were proposed by the public include conducting those scenario-based exercises to test procedures, establishing a volunteer network to support local recovery efforts, improving digital communications to share information about natural hazards, and increasing investment in water and land-based conservation efforts. And I do think it's very cool that through sort of two separate efforts to collect ideas and brainstorm on mitigation actions, there's actually a lot of alignment between the public and the community representatives that participated in the risk assessment workshop. So now I think I'm going to turn it back to Justin to kind of walk you through how he took all this risk assessment information, all of this brainstorming, and updated the county's hazard mitigation strategy.
Thank you, Kelly. Next slide, please. So now that we've spent some time reviewing your natural hazards risk landscape and some of the good discussion and conversation we had during some of our in-person and virtual meetings, let's talk about what's being done to address it. So next slide, please, Kelly. All right. So just a few short months ago, in March 2023, as many of you will recall, the Natural Hazards Mitigation Plan Committee again came together in person at the Cary Village Hall. So thank you very much to the chief for hosting us again. To review the status of existing mitigation actions described within the 2016 plan, which included identifying opportunities for both, cross-community or multi-jurisdictional projects and cross-county collaboration. So great to see, folks from Kane County, Lake County, and others joining us at these meetings. It really brought just some extra oomph to those proceedings. So note that the committee has come together annually every year since the last plan was adopted rather in 2017 to review the status of these actions. So their due diligence made this a very efficient process. So again, just want to thank the committee members for not just their participation during this planning process over the last 6 or so months, but also just making a point to come together every year and relook at the plan and look at the status of those actions. So excellent work. Again, in March, turnout was excellent. I think we had over 40 participants representing approximately 20 McHenry County jurisdictions. So excellent turnout and excellent discussion, as you can obviously see from the slide here. So next slide, Kelly. All right. So first point of business, after reviewing the results of the risk assessment, we voted to really revalidate the county's current mitigation goals and guidelines that you see here, right? Note that goals in this context are very broad, long-term policy and vision statements that explain what is to be achieved by implementing this mitigation strategy. So just to cover and recap these goals here. Goal 1, protecting the lives, health, and safety of the people within the county from the impact and effects of natural hazards. Also protecting public services, utilities, and critical facilities from potential damage from natural hazard events. Funny enough, those were the first two in terms of ranking what was most important in terms of protection, in regards to natural hazards. Obviously, people, lives, and property, and then those critical public services, police, fire and rescue, emergency services. Protecting historic, cultural, and natural resources from the effects of natural hazards, again, scored very, very highly. Ensuring that new development doesn't create new problems, very important. Mitigating to protect against economic and transportation losses due to natural disasters or natural hazards rather, and then identifying specific projects to protect lives and mitigate damage where it's cost effective and affordable to the county. So we also took a look at the guidelines as well, right? So guidelines, on the other hand, are meant to really focus how the county achieves the mitigation strategies, right? So we've got some impressive goals. So now how exactly are we going to accomplish our goals? And so, and really, really quick, sounds like we've got a hot mic. Just a reminder to please keep your line muted for us. Thank you. And so these guidelines, these barriers to really focus our efforts were focusing natural hazard mitigation efforts on floods, severe summer and winter storms, tornadoes, extreme cold and heat events, and drought. Funny enough, were the top hazards again. So definitely worthy of continuing to keep this one. Making folks aware of the hazards they face. A lot of the feedback we received from that public survey was, hey, I'm interested. Always interested in more information around hazards and around preparedness. Seeking state and federal support for mitigation efforts, right? So really dialing in a few projects that will be competitive on a state scale and a national scale for some of those fundings. And then being very wise, guideline number 4, about how we use those local funds to protect public services, critical facilities, and just overall health and well-being. Examining equitable approaches, right? Making sure that we're focusing not just on individual, certain kinds of individuals, certain communities, but everyone in the county. Creating and fostering public-private partnerships, right? So making sure that we're bringing together folks from across the county, business owners, conservationists, public health departments, as well as some more traditional partners like emergency management, planning and development to support these efforts. And then really just striving to improve and expand businesses, transportation, economic opportunities, obviously with an eye for future growth, and making sure that this isn't just a safe place for current residents to live, but also for future ones as well. So great goals, great guidelines. After looking at our risk, we decided, hey, these are still the right ones for us. Next slide, Kelly. Okay, so after we reviewed the county's action plan, or excuse me, next, what we did after reviewing the goals and guidelines, we reviewed the county's action plan, or really individual projects to advance the goals of the mitigation strategy. When we started, there were 34 high-level action items contained in the 2016 plan. All good action items, but certainly a lot. And within each one were individual commitments, both from the county as well as individual municipalities, both municipalities as well as some unincorporated areas. And so our first task was really confirming the status of each, right? Again, the committee had been meeting annually to talk about these, so that made our work, pretty easy. But what we did was we identified one action item in particular, as you can see on the left side of your screen here, as having been completed since the last plan was adopted, installing a tornado siren at the Public Works facility in the Village of Richmond. Next, during our analysis, we noted that some action items were multi-jurisdictional, right, which covered a swath or the entire county, versus some that were very community specific, which you can see on the right side of your screen. So now, given this is a community-wide plan, if you can think back to David's expectations at the beginning of the call, we decided to take those community-specific action items and consolidate them under those multi-jurisdictional action items for consistency. So we didn't lose them. We just made sure that that those folded under in the right place, so that we were giving the communities, the individual communities, credit for these as well. So as a result, we were able to whittle down the number of mitigation action items from 34 to 24, and then confirmed the status of individual projects, both at the county and community level for each one. So just to note that these are documented in detail in your plan, and can be used to prioritize projects for current funding or projects that need funding. So more on that later. Next slide for me, please, Kelly. Now, as Kelly mentioned, this plan's got to be approved by both the Illinois Emergency Management Agency as well as the Federal Emergency Management Agency, so IEMA and FEMA. Now, a new requirement of FEMA for hazard mitigation planning is to evaluate and prioritize action items to better support long-term planning over a period of years, which, think about it, makes sense, right? If you've got a list of 24 things, well, what are the first things we're going to tackle relative to our risk? What are the things that maybe we can do later relative to our risk that aren't quite as dire? So what we did was we leaned on some industry best practice here to develop this methodology, which you can see on the left side of your screen, for evaluating hazard mitigation strategies, and just really making sure that we're incorporating the types of things that FEMA is looking for. So as you can see here, we've got effectiveness, right? Like, how effective is this action item in actually addressing the risk associated with this hazard? Efficiency. Is it cost effective, right? Is this something that we can do in the near term with our budget, or is this something that we may need to earmark for potential state or federal grant money down the road? Multi-hazards, right, is one thing. There's one activity address multiple hazards and multiple vulnerabilities. And then addressing those high risk hazards that Kelly, sorry, covered earlier, those things that really rose to the top as we were looking at a lot of recent community, state, county, and FEMA data. Addressing critical communications and critical facilities, right? We know that's important from the public survey, from what we heard from the committee, that making sure that those lines of communication are working, before, during, and after disaster. Same with critical facilities, right? Making sure that we're really shoring up our critical facilities well ahead of the next disaster event. And then finally, equity, right? Making sure that that we're evaluating individual activities by the greatest return, not just for individual communities or individual types of folks within the county, but for all the county, right? So I want to make sure that the activities that we're prioritizing are most equitable. And so what you can see on the right-hand side of your screen here are the results of that evaluation. Um, and there were really 8 action items that scored the highest based on those evaluation factors. So we've got mitigation of public infrastructure. I don't think there's any surprise there. Investigation of critical facilities, really learning which of our critical facilities that provide critical functions are in most need of enhancement and hardening. Designing critical facilities, so ones that haven't been developed yet with natural hazards protection in mind. Mitigation of floodplain programs, right? So property protection projects, installing safe rooms, right? Making sure that there's safe places for people to go, no matter where you live in the county before a disaster occurs. Strengthening building codes. We talked a lot about, or Kelly mentioned earlier, a lot about strong wind and rain events and being prepared for those. So ensuring that we've got the right building codes in place and that we're enforcing those, not to be bad cops, but ultimately to make sure that we are again going to be resilient, right? Going to be able to recover quickly from a disaster event. Um, Developing a public information strategy. That's something that is a big priority, I know, of EMA. And there's a lot of communities that we learned through this process doing a lot of great things to keep their folks aware of their risk, as well as get information to them very, very quickly in the event of a disaster. So really leaning on those best practices across the county to develop something more county-wide. And then last but not least here, seeking mitigation grant funding for additional mitigation planning and cost beneficial, implementation projects. You can see this one's highlighted. So Kelly, if you could take me to the next slide. So based on our analysis of all of the county and individual community activities to advance this strategy, we identified these 7 projects as good candidates for state or federal mitigation grant funding, okay? Installing stream gauges and Woods Creek, Crystal Creek, and elsewhere is needed. Building county-wide remote and regional salt storage capabilities to enhance severe winter storm preparedness. Constructing a living snow fence, again, more winter storm preparedness. Executing a structure-specific risk assessment on the lower 10 miles of the Nipperson Creek, which I do believe actually there is some movement from a FEMA hazard mitigation grant program perspective there as well. Continuing to target and purchase repetitive loss and severe repetitive loss properties, right? So really focused on flood-prone properties, ensuring that those areas are safe. Increasing countywide capacity and capability to perform building code training and enforcement, right? Making sure folks know their codes, that communities that have older codes are making progress towards adopting the latest and greatest, because we know buildings will be more secure, more safe to some of these hazards if those latest building codes are in place. And then last but not least, Tree City USA, which I know a lot of communities in the county are a part of, increasing that or enhancing that participation, but also exploring opportunities to do some vegetative management, right? Transmission line undergrounding in heavily wooded areas. So not just on the individual community level, because we know all you hardworking public work folks out there are doing this. So really making a countywide investment in that vegetative management. All right, next slide for me, Kelly. All right. So we talked about the mitigation strategy at a high level from a goals and guidelines perspective, all the way down to individual activities. Just want to say that there are likely some other activities, but these are the ones that came directly from your community representatives and represent opportunities for the county and individual communities to come together and increase the resilience of your communities. And so I think just like John Hannibal Smith said on the A team, it's great to see a plan come together, or I love it when a plan comes together. So really good to see this take its way all the way to, hey, here's 6 or 7 things that we feel like are going to be really good for potential grant funding later on. So now that we've discussed some projects, I'd like to invite Kelly back to share some information about upcoming federal mitigation programs and how they could be good avenues to increase capacity to do some of this important work. So Kelly, turning it back over to you.
Thank you. And before we talk about some of the upcoming grant funding opportunities for hazard mitigation projects, one of the things or some of the feedback that we're looking for as part of this call and even after this call is if we need to add any mitigation actions to our strategy, because an action does need to be in the strategy in order for you to apply for funding for it. Now, there will be additional opportunities throughout the next 5 years until the next plan update to add more mitigation activities and things like that. But we really want to make sure that we are being as sort of thorough as we can at this time. So if there's something that you want to make sure is added in, now is the time to kind of raise your hand so we can make sure it gets included. All right, so let's talk about federal funding opportunities. So the timing for this plan and getting it over to IEMA is kind of perfect. So IEMA just within the last week or so released information on some near-term deadlines for two of FEMA's grant programs related to natural hazards. So this includes the BRIC program, the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, and the Flood Mitigation Assistance program. So this is what FEMA calls their non-disaster programs and are available on an annual application cycle. So, not to bury the lead, but IEMA is looking to start their application process early. So we wanted to share some information regarding these grant programs, the type of projects that they fund, so that way folks can start thinking about, if you want to submit an application this year, what that might look like. So I'll go ahead and start with the BRIC program. So the FEMA BRIC program, it's an all hazards mitigation program, which means there does not have to be a specific disaster tieback or even a long history of damage for a project to be eligible. And you can submit projects that address flooding, that address drought, that address erosion, wildfire, you name it. If it's a natural hazard, this program will pay for it with some stipulations, of course. So the feds will actually fund 75% of project costs through the BRIC program, or $50 million, whichever cost is lower. And really through BRIC, FEMA is trying to prioritize projects that protect critical infrastructure, enhance resilience for disadvantaged communities, incorporates nature-based solutions, and are, again, partnerships between multiple communities. A benefit cost analysis is required for all project submittals, but plans and feasibility studies are also eligible for funding. So just to give y'all an idea of the types of projects that can be funded under BRIC, this is almost an exact list to the mitigation activity examples that we showed earlier. So again, you can apply for funds to do additional hazard mitigation planning work, to do project scoping, which is where, maybe you know that there's a problem somewhere, but you need to do more study to really figure out like the vulnerability, the extent, or even do like community outreach and identify appropriate solutions. So you can apply for funds to do those types of studies with this program. In addition to, your normal construction projects, right? So property acquisition and elevations, stormwater improvements, erosion control, utility hardening. I think over the past few years with the BRIC program, we see flood control as the number one funded project type through this program, with utility hardening being a close second. And utility hardening is also like a pretty large definition too, right? So that can mean undergrounding utilities. It can mean providing redundant power sources. It can mean retrofitting or mitigating water and wastewater systems. It's really kind of a large definition there. So the sort of sister program to BRIC is the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program. So the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program is a little different in that it focuses just on flooding, as indicated in the name. And it also has a little bit of a different intent. So the FMA program really wants to buy down risk to the NFIP. So all projects have to benefit property owners that have flood insurance. Which can be a little bit tricky. So the BRIC program is definitely more popular than the FMA program, but we are seeing with the bipartisan infrastructure law, there's going to be higher amounts of funding available in the FMA program moving forward than there has been historically. So, for example, in fiscal year 21, I think there was $160 million available nationwide for the FMA program. And last year there was $800 million available. So we anticipate there's going to continue to be high funding amounts available in both BRIC and FMA. So the other the other component of FMA that FEMA wants to use this program to address is repetitive loss and severe repetitive loss properties. So, actual homes and homeowners who have experienced multiple flood losses are really consistently prioritized through this program. Now, FEMA has some special definitions for what constitutes a repetitive loss and a severe repetitive loss structure. So if you're not sure what kind of structures like that exist in your community, Joanna Coletti is here on the phone. She has a lot of information, and we can't share it here during this call today, but I'm sure it's something that she can share in the future as you think about if you want to submit any FMA applications. All right. And so here are just some examples of eligible activities under the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program. So even though, again, the program is focused on reducing risk to the NFIP and addressing severe repetitive loss and repetitive loss structures, that doesn't mean just property acquisition and elevation. So we have seen the program fund stormwater retrofits, even construction of pump stations to address repetitive loss areas. You can do stream restoration here if it's protecting a repetitive loss area, and you can also apply for planning dollars under FMA as well. So, lastly, before we kind of open things up for questions, like I said, IEMA is getting their planning process started very early for the BRIC and FMA application cycles. So typically, FEMA will release a notice of funding opportunity for the BRIC and FMA programs in late August. Um, but IEMA wants to review and understand who within Illinois wants to submit BRIC and FMA projects much earlier. So the state is asking for pre-applications or notices of intent by June 30th, which is a month from now. Now, you don't have to have all of your project details available. IEMA is really just looking for a high level scope of work so that way they can do an eligibility review and also do some capacity planning on their end as they prepare for this application cycle. So in terms of key dates, you definitely want to pay attention to these things on the right. So IEMA is requiring a notice of intent to be submitted by June 30. FEMA will release their notice of funding opportunity by the end of August, and that will include for both the BRIC and FMA programs the amount of funding that's available, and if FEMA is changing any of their priorities with those programs, and anything new that they're incorporating into requirements, which typically is not too much. Then after August, folks will have time to actually develop your application. So, write the grant, do the benefit cost analysis, figure out sort of your funding and how you're going to pay for the local match component. And you usually have until about November to do that. Then a community will submit your application to IEMA. IEMA will review over the holidays. It's not a fun time to go through this, but we are working with FEMA here, so we got to do what they say. And then IEMA will have to submit all of their applications that they've reviewed and sort of supported by the end of January of next year. So it's a long application cycle timeline, but because of the funding amounts available and the competitiveness of the program, we are seeing a lot of states start their internal planning process earlier this year than previously. And so with that, I think we are ready to move into questions.
Thanks,
Um,
Kelly.
yeah,
Yeah. Thanks, Kelly. So yeah, everybody, we've reached the end of our presentation today. Thank you all so much for your patience. Now we really want to hear from you and respond to some of the questions and comments we're getting in the chat. So again, please use the chat, or if you prefer, raise your hands using that feature in Teams, and we'll call on you. A couple of questions I've already seen in the chat, Kelly. The first is that you mentioned an ability to add mitigation activities during the life of the plan, so over the next 5 years. Want to know more about how that's done,
mhm.
right? Assuming that once the plan is approved, can't update it again. So did you mean you can add things to the plan, or that you can just collect those activities and ultimately add them to the plan 5 years down the road?
So what a lot of communities do is they actually keep like a live working version of their project list. So for McHenry County, this is your action items. And it's actually a process that McHenry County is already doing. So the local mitigation, or I'm sorry, the mitigation strategy working group already meets annually to, update those action items. So in addition to crossing things off, you can also be adding things on to that list. And that list is appropriate for demonstrating to FEMA, hey, we've identified this project previously as something the county wants to do. It aligns with hazard mitigation goals and activities. And it provides a little bit more flexibility for applying for funds for specific projects later on.
Thanks, Kelly. I see Bob's hand up. Go ahead, Bob.
So Bob logged in, so his name's on there. So if a community is not part of the plan, that can't be added. They would have had been part of the plan.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
All right,
You
that's
do
where,
you do have to get buy-in now, but the communities who do participate and who do formally adopt the plan can continue to add projects as
okay,
you see fit through the update process.
thanks so much. That helps a lot.
Yeah.
All right, Kelly, I see another one here. Is eligibility for these BRIC funds based on the current plan or the new one? Basically, when EMA submits that plan over to IEMA in the next couple of weeks, does that restart the clock on that 5-year cycle, or would any notice of intent applications that would go in June be beholden to the previous plan?
So once we submit the draft plan to IEMA, that immediately puts your plan status in kind of the review category. And it should allow McHenry County and its communities who are participating in the plan process to submit those notice of intents to IEMA. But you will have to clarify in your notice of intent that your plan is currently going through the review process.
Thanks, Kelly. All right, and I see a comment from, or a question rather, from Mark from Bull Valley. Good to see you again. So Bull Valley submitted multiple projects. Yes. There has been a lack of clarity as to whether these projects are part of the county plan. How can we be certain our projects have been accepted? So, Mark, rest assured, every one of those projects was input as a line item beside Bull Valley under every action item. So everything that you submitted is in the plan. Same goes for everyone else, either during one of those committee meetings or via email where you submitted, hey, this is how we're satisfying or advancing this action item. Those have gone verbatim directly into the plan. So Mark, I can even I'll check with Bob and David to see if we can even send you an advanced copy of what that looks like, so you can sleep easier knowing that every one of those projects that you submitted that Bull Valley's doing, or is either in progress or is planning to do, are in there and can be referenced for grant funding, if that's the goal. All right. Any other questions or comments? Absolutely, Mark. And thank you for that. All right, we'll give folks just another couple of minutes during our wrap up. If we see any come through, we'll make sure to come back and check the chat. But Kelly, with that, go ahead and take us to the next slide. Excellent. And then the next slide after that, wonderful. So again, thank you all for your participation, not just today. Obviously today's great to see everyone again, but just through this whole process. 6 months is not a not a long time to update a hazard mitigation plan. But definitely glad to see all the participation from when we came on late last year all the way to now. All right, I'm going to stop really quick because I see a hand up and I see a comment in the chat. Scott, I see you've got your hand up, so go ahead and come off mute.
Yeah, I appreciate this opportunity. I just wanted to say to Justin and Kelly, thank you so much for your hard work and effort. I was chatting with David earlier this morning, David Christensen, and we were just talking about how smooth this process went. We have to do this every so many years, and just looking at the amount of participation that we had this year compared to the past, the amount of just enthusiasm, and I'll tell you, this is my second go around into this process. The first one I haven't been too involved, but going through this one, through your guidance and consultation, I have a much deeper understanding of what this document is, how it can be used, how it can be leveraged, how important it is. And I want to thank you all for that. I think you did a great job, and it was a pleasure seeing you work.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Scott. It's definitely been a great pleasure for us. And I want to throw some kudos your way because looking at that strategy, you guys have put hazard mitigation front and center in your county strategy, which includes a lot of other things, not just hazard mitigation, right? So excellent to see that. I'm sure folks at IEMA and FEMA are going to be super happy to see that as well. So kudos to you guys for really prioritizing hazard mitigation as you're thinking long term about your county and the communities within your county as well.
I just want to say a good EMA director keeps his community really well prepared. So
that's right. All right. Patrick, I see, good to see you again. I see in the chat here if the reciprocal is true, if we desire to update our building codes and we didn't include that in the plan for an individual community, can we use the plan as justification for that? So Patrick, what I can tell you is a commitment to updating those building codes and doing some training and enforcement around those building codes is a county-wide effort. So any community can claim, yes, this is something that I want to advance. So absolutely. If you've got a project in mind related to building codes, all you need to do is just reference the building codes action item in there, which is applicable to all communities. So absolutely. All right. Again, well, I'm happy to pause. We still got some time. So if folks have other questions or comments, feel free to drop those in the chat or raise your hand. A couple quick reminders. Hopefully a couple more will come in, but a few quick reminders here before we adjourn. If you received an email request from us to confirm some data and haven't yet responded, please do so. Again, we're going to try to get this over to IEMA in the next couple of weeks. So the sooner you can turn around some of that information, the better. I promise it won't be too painful. And if you're a mitigation committee member and have not yet provided a letter of support or just not sure, please reach out to the county EMA office via the email you see on your screen here. We're more than happy to confirm or confirm whether or not you have. And then if you haven't, we'll send you over a blank one you can fill out pretty quickly. Again, it just gives you credit for participating in this process, and by that makes you an eligible sub-applicant for funding. So definitely take a minute to do that if you haven't already. All right. Lastly, if we end the meeting early and you've got some questions or comments regarding today's meeting, please send those over to the county EMA email you see on your screen. we're more than happy to follow up. Want to make sure that you've got a good understanding of this process. All right, Bob or David, our fearless leaders, anything else you want to add before we adjourn today?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows that on our EMA site, under hazard mitigation, we have captured everything from the beginning of this process, at least as much as possible. So if anybody needs to play catch up or just wants to review any information, everything should be there, including the recordings that we've had with these virtual meetings, agendas, slide presentations. So if anybody needs to, please, check out our hazard mitigation website, and it is on our EMA page. That's it.
Thank you, guys. And just one more final thank you goes to some folks at the county that were very, very involved, meeting, at least once every couple of weeks to chat through any questions or concerns we had. So Mr. Ernest Varga, Ms. Joanna Coletti, Ms. Nicole Gattuso and her team in the GIS office. This is something we could not have done without you. So just really want to say thank you to you all for being patient with us as we reviewed all that information, and we're always open to questions and phone calls. Also want to thank the students that we had from the University of Chicago, in particular Olga, which I know reached out and spoke to a lot of you folks, was just an invaluable resource for us as well. So just want to say thank you to a few folks that really went above and beyond to help with this effort. And then for Kelly and I, this has really been our great pleasure working with the county and the committee to support this work over the last 6 months. And so we're excited and encouraged by all the thoughtful participation and are very hopeful that whatever funding you guys go after, you'll get. All right. That is all from us. Again, reach out to the email on the screen if you have any additional questions or comments. You can actually even drop those in the chat after we stop. We'll still see them and make sure that we respond. But everyone have a great rest of the week, and we will see you next time. All right, goodbye, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.